Hi, welcome to Building Codes Division. I'm Becky Broska, a program representative with the division, and I'm here at Salem's Fire Station number 5 to open this presentation. The State of Oregon Building Codes Division provides a wide range of services to the public and to Oregon's construction industry. We serve Oregonians by working to ensure safe building construction while promoting a positive business climate within the state. This is the code training for wildfire hazard mitigation requirements contained in the 2023 Oregon Residential Specialty Code. This training has been prepared for residential contractors licensed by Oregon's Construction Contractors Board. This training video covers construction standards and material compliance requirements from the latest iteration of the Oregon Residential Specialty Code, the 2023 ORSC, regarding wildfire hazard mitigation or home hardening. The objective for this training is to identify the appropriate construction standards required in areas of our state where the wildfire hazard mitigation provisions of the 2023 ORSC are applicable. As always, we welcome any and all inquiries or feedback regarding the technical content of this training. Here is a brief introduction to the structural technical team members presenting this training. Tony Rocco is our structural program chief, and Eric McMullen is our senior building code specialist. Tony Rocco has worked in the industry for over 20 years and has been the structural program chief since 2017. Tony has a personal library of national and state codes dating back to the early 1900s. And believes that the original history and true genesis of modern code provisions is critical to the improvement of Oregon specialty codes for local government partners, customers, and all stakeholders. He is a great resource for questions about ORSC and OSSC matters. Eric McMullen has a wealth of code experience from an extensive 27-year fire service career. He started working with fire and building codes in the early 1990s at the Oregon Office of State Fire Marshal. Eric is a great resource for all things fire life safety and is our resident fire systems expert.
Section R327 of the Residential Code has been around for 20 years. In 2019, it was expanded to include a much broader range of wildfire hazard mitigation standards. These provisions are often referred to as home hardening or fire hardening and are intended to help prevent ignition of a home during a wildfire event, most often via airborne embers. These provisions apply generally to all dwellings and their accessory buildings in areas where a local municipality has implemented the provisions via local ordinance. Currently, the standards are available for all municipalities in the state to adopt and only apply to those areas within the county or city that are detailed in the adopting ordinance and identified on the locally required map. Local building officials, of course, retain the flexibility to modify the requirements for any particular lot, property, or dwelling, remodel, or reconstruction activity based on the site details. As we covered on the previous slide, Section R327 is available for any municipality to voluntarily adopt, without going through the local amendment process detailed by statute and rule. Where adopted locally, the ordinance must outline the areas where the provisions apply, a local plan to address any subdivisions already under construction, and a local appeal mechanism for customers to challenge the additional requirements. Some municipalities already have existing ordinances in place adopting these standards. After the expansion of the section in 2019, the cities of Medford and Ashland adopted the section. Other municipalities, such as Deschutes County, have long standing partial ordinances requiring compliant roof coverings and prohibiting wood shingles or shakes. All existing ordinances are recognized and permitted to continue without change as determined legally sufficient by the municipality. To determine if the standards apply in the area where you are working, we recommend you contact the local building department experts directly. On a very important side note, our Oregon legislature has established a comprehensive statewide policy regarding future application of these wildfire mitigation construction standards. While currently Section R327 is an optional set of requirements for local governments to consider implementing, along with establishing a local wildfire hazard zone map, in the near future, a statewide wildfire risk map will be implemented by the Department of Forestry with extensive support from Oregon State University. Once that statewide map is effective, through the Oregon Explorer online mapping database, it will supersede all locally adopted maps and will identify all areas of the state where these construction standards of Section R327 will apply outright. At that time, these provisions will no longer be optional for local government, but will become automatically applicable to all areas identified on the map as elevated wildfire hazard zones. Until then, these provisions remain optional for local government. When the forthcoming statewide policy is implemented, interim amendments to the residential code will be adopted through our public rulemaking and public advisory board meeting processes. If you're signed up for division notifications, you will receive ample notification of these meetings. Where adopted locally, all of the following require compliance with the provisions of the section unless specifically exempted elsewhere by the section. New dwellings, new accessory buildings like detached garages, sheds, and shops, new additions to existing dwellings, increasing the overall area of the dwelling, new additions to existing accessory structures, where applicable, which aren't nearly as common as dwelling additions, and full replacement of existing exterior elements covered by the section. This only applies where that element is replaced in its entirety. For example, if the existing dwelling is entirely re-roofed, the new roof covering would be required to meet the standards of this section. However, if an existing roof is simply patched or repaired, which only impacts a segment of the existing roof covering, the standards would not apply. Additionally, non-habitable accessory structures are exempt where they are detached, not greater than 400 square feet in usable floor area, and a minimum of 50 feet away from any other structure on the lot. Where the accessory structure is less than 50 feet from any other structure on the lot, it must comply with the standards regardless of the size or area. Later in the presentation, Eric will cover each of the exterior elements in more detail to help identify options for compliance. As we covered on the last slide, the hazard mitigation standards apply to the full replacement of exterior elements which are covered by Section R327. This overlaps with existing permit exemptions identified in Chapter 1, Section R105.2. Some exterior elements, such as windows, which are required to be fire resistance rated, and roof coverings of re-roofing activities located in areas designated by the municipality as wildfire hazard zones, do require appropriate building permits through the local building department. However, other items such as small accessory structures like tool sheds, garages, or carports, and activities such as re-siding of an existing dwelling remain exempt from building permits even in the areas where Section R327 has been voluntarily adopted. The overarching guidance of Chapter 1 permit exemptions is that the allowances to be exempt from a local building permit do not allow any work to be conducted without meeting the applicable code standards for the items being exempted. More plainly, even if the activity is exempt, the code still requires that the work conducted meet the applicable provisions, and in this case, that the exempt item still complies with the wildfire hazard mitigation construction standards. This will be an important key to remember when conducting work that is exempt from inspection oversight in areas where the municipality has adopted the R327 standards. We're now moving into the technical provisions of the section. We'll start out by covering several definitions for additional context regarding the code's expectation of compliant materials. Further along in the presentation, Eric will provide all the details you will need regarding the technical application of these definitions. The first definition we have is heavy timber. Code uses this term to describe materials which are either solid sawn or glulam wood, and of not less than 4 inches nominal in any dimension. When considering standard lumber packages, this means we must minimally have a 4x4 member to constitute heavy timber. Keep this in mind, particularly for porch cover construction, other projections, walking surfaces such as decks, and for any location where the term is used in the section. Next, we have ignition-resistant material. This very technical definition describes building materials which resist ignition or sustained flame exposure to a level needed to reduce assumed loss or damage from wildfires under the worst-case conditions and assumed exposure to burning embers and small flames. To comply as ignition resistant, the exterior building material must be tested in accordance with ASTM E84 or UL 723 and demonstrate the following characteristics: a flame spread index of 25 or less when exposed to the 30-minute test, and show no evidence of significant combustion by limiting the flame front of the test flame to not more than 10.5 feet beyond the center line of the burner at any time during the 30 minutes. So how do you know if a material is ignition resistant? Look at the cut sheets. The manufacturers of these materials want to advertise their durability and properties as well as testing results. Using the manufacturer's technical data sheets is the best way to quickly identify material compliance or non-compliance. If you have a question about a particular product, we recommend contacting the manufacturer directly before purchasing the product. For our last technical definition, we have the highest level of wildfire-resistant building materials. Those are non-combustible materials. This gold standard material property is reserved for building materials in their actual installation form, which will not ignite, burn, support flame propagation or combustion, and will not release flammable vapors when subjected to fire or heat. The applicable testing standard in this case is ASTM E136, and the testing protocol includes exposing the material to heat and flame upwards of 1382 degrees Fahrenheit for not less than 30 minutes. So what non-combustible materials come to mind when you hear the term and review the definition here? Commonly, hard metals like steel and masonry, including both CMU or concrete masonry units and traditional clay brick, are qualified. Other materials include concrete, certain glass, and even some synthetic proprietary composites. When in doubt about the material testing, qualifications, properties, and all related details, we would recommend relying on the manufacturer data and standardized material details for things like steel members and masonry piecework. Now that we have gone through the administrative foundation of the wildfire hazard mitigation provisions of Section R327, and we reviewed a few critical technical definitions, it's time to dig into the technical installation requirements along with senior building code specialist and vastly experienced fire service representative, Eric McMullen. Take it away, Eric.
Now that Tony's through walking you through the scoping, provisions, and the definitions, we'll move on to the material specific requirements. The first requirement is roofing in R327.3. The minimum requirement for roofing is a Class B roof assembly. There's quite a few different materials that can get you there: tile, clay, concrete, metal. Most architectural asphalt shingles will give you a Class B rating. The key is you just want to check with the manufacturer and make sure that that appropriate rating applies to the material you're installing. Wood shingles and shake roofs are not permitted at all, even if they're fire retardant treated. And for metal and tile, there's one other thing that we need to address, and we'll look at that on the next slide. As I mentioned in the previous slide, when it comes to metal or clay tile roofs that leave gaps like you see in this illustration on the right, the requirement is to mitigate those gaps with one of three options. The first option is that the material is constructed such that it prevents the intrusion of flame and embers. The second option is to fill those voids with an approved fire blocking material. And note that approved is italicized, so that means that it's defined. And the approved fire blocking materials can be found in this code in section R302.11.1. The last option is to put down a layer of 72-pound mineral surfaced non-perforated cap sheet under the roofing material on top of the roof deck. When it comes to valleys, if valley flashing is installed, then some additional treatment is required. For laced valleys with asphalt shingles, of course, this wouldn't apply. But when valley flashing is installed, it has to be a minimum of 26 gauge corrosion resistant galvanized metal, and that metal has to be laid over a minimum 72-pound mineral surfaced non-perforated cap sheet, not less than 36 inches wide all the way from the bottom to the top of the valley. The final topic under the roofing category is gutters. Gutters aren't always required in every jurisdiction, but where they are required, they will be required to be non-combustible materials, and they'll be required to be provided with a means to prevent accumulation of leaves and debris in the gutter. The code is not specific about the type of method for preventing the leaves and debris, but that methodology would also have to be non-combustible. The next subject matter we come to in section R327.3.2 is ventilation. The ventilation provisions cover all types of ventilation on a house, so roof ventilation, gable-in ventilation, and even crawl space ventilation, any of those vents. There's three options for how to deal with those vents, the first of which is to cover them with a non-combustible, corrosion-resistant wire mesh. And that wire mesh has to be a minimum of 1/16 inch and a maximum of 1/8 inch in any dimension. The other option is to provide vents that are designed to resist intrusion of burning embers and flame, and these are special vents. We'll talk a little bit more about those on the next slide. And the last option is some other approved material or device. And you'll note that approved is italicized. And again, just a reminder that that means that term is defined. And the definition of approved is as approved by the building official. So that would mean some other material or device that the building official deems equivalent. Still under the subject of ventilation, now we get to the topic of ventilation specific to eaves, soffits, and cornices. In the previous slide, we gave you three options for how to deal with vents, generally crawl spaces, gable ends, roofs. This is specific to just eaves, soffits, and cornices. And the base requirement is that there are no ventilation openings allowed in these areas. And there's a couple of exceptions. The first exception is vents that are designed to resist the intrusion of flame and burning embers. So there's a couple examples on the right here. These are made by Vulcan. The top is a soffit vent and the bottom is a foundation type vent. So these are examples of the vents that would fit that exception. And then the second exception is that you can use any of the methods on the previous slide, so the non-combustible mesh vents like on the right or other approved method by the building official, as long as the eave or soffit or cornice is at least 12 feet or greater above grade. So this would apply for most second story applications. The next subject matter we come to is exterior walls in section R327.3.3. The first part of this provision lays out the 5 different options for exterior wall coverings or wall assemblies. And those are different ducts in terms of exterior wall covering just literally being the covering on the outside of the wall and the assembly being the entirety of the wall. So you see the 5 items here, and you're going to see these items repeated as we go forward on a lot of the other different materials. And these are the items that Tony went over under the definitions section. So your requirement for exterior walls are non-combustible material. So that's things like metal, fiber, cement, siding complies, which is pretty common. Ignition resistant materials, and those are those that undergo the test that Tony would have talked about under the definitions. Heavy timber, again defined, and log wall construction is or assembly, and that's kind of self-evident. And then the last one is kind of a catch-all, a condition of acceptance, and we're going to cover that in more detail in a little bit, but that's an actual testing of an assembly. So somebody puts together an assembly and has it tested specifically, and if it passes, then it would be approved. Still under the subject of exterior walls, we have a couple of exceptions to the previous provisions we just discussed. So under these exceptions, there's 2 options that are considered deemed to comply. The first option is placing 1 layer of 5/8" Type X exterior gypsum sheathing behind the wall covering. So you could do a wood T111 and put the 5/8 Type X gyp behind it, and that would work. And then the other option is the exterior portion of a 1-hour fire resistant rated exterior wall. So exterior walls are probably more common, rated exterior walls in commercial applications, or when you get too close to a property line in a residential application. So you can do the exterior side of that assembly from the fire resistance and sound control design manual or the JIP manual. Still under exterior walls, we get to the conditions of acceptance. So when we were talking about exterior walls and looking at the 5 options, remember option number 5 was a specific wall assembly that's tested. And the language in R327.3.3.2 tells you what that conditions of acceptance has to look like. It's an ASTM E2707 test to prove that the assembly is equivalent. Finally, under the subject of exterior walls, we discuss the extent of the exterior wall covering and trim. For exterior wall covering, it's got to go from the top of the foundation up to the bottom of the roof, and it has to terminate at 2-inch nominal solid wood blocking. So up to the bird block or to the bottom of an enclosed soffit eave. The other issue that comes up quite often is trim. And so when you're installing trim, like the illustration on the right, like fiber cement siding, the trim either has to be also fiber cement siding if it's up against the sheathing, like shown here, or that trim could be wood trim, but it would have to be on top of the fiber cement siding. So that exterior cover that meets the requirement has to be against the sheathing. On to the next subject matter. In section R327.3.4, we come to overhanging projections. Overhanging projections is a broad term that encompasses the list that you see below: exterior balconies, carports, decks, patio covers, porch ceilings, unenclosed roofs and floors, and overhanging buildings, and similar type projections. So we'll break these down as we move forward through the next slides. The first topic under overhanging projections is soffits and eaves. So the base requirement is that if the soffit or eave is less than 12 feet above grade, then one of the following shall be provided. And this list, again, is the same as exterior wall covering. So you can choose from this list. In most cases, the soffits are enclosed with similar material to the siding. Still under the subject of soffits and eaves, there are some exceptions, three different exceptions to not require the protection. The first of which is if all framing members are 12 feet or greater above grade and 2-inch nominal eave fire blocking is provided between the roof framing members. And that needs to be installed from the top plate to the underside of the roof sheathing. The second option here is gable end overhangs, like shown in this illustration above to the right. The roof assembly projections beyond the exterior wall are not required to be protected. Again, the picture to the right shows them enclosed, except for the area at the lower end of the rafter tails. And then the last exception is for fascia and other architectural trim boards. Those are always accepted from this requirement. Still under the subject matter of overhanging projections, we come to patio and porch ceilings. So the underside of these structures, as long as they're greater than 200 square feet in area and less than 12 feet above grade, shall be protected. So smaller than 200 square feet or over 12 feet high, the underside doesn't need to be protected. Otherwise, the bottom of that exposed porch or patio could be a roof over a deck. We see the same 5 options as we first saw under exterior walls. And of course, architectural trim boards are accepted. We are up to section R 327.3.4.3, still under overhanging projections. And this section covers floor projections. So cantilevered floors, like the illustration to the right, if the underside would need to be protected if less than 12 feet above grade. And again, same list and same exception for architectural trim boards for these floor projections. Section R 327.3.4.4, underfloor protection. This subject is still under overhanging projections, and this provision is intended to encompass houses like you see on the right that are completely elevated, so that that vulnerable underfloor space would have to be protected by one of that same 5 list. And there is an exception for heavy timber structural columns and beams in those areas. And if you recall back under the definitions, heavy timber was a minimum of 4-inch dimension. And finally, under overhanging projections, we come to the conditions of acceptance, which again is similar to the exterior wall provisions that we discussed earlier. And this applies to that 5th option under the sections listed there in that bottom box. The next subject matter is walking surfaces in section R 327.3.5. And these provisions cover areas like decks, porches, balconies, and would cover not just the decking, but the substructure supporting the walking surface as well. So the scope on this are decks, porches, and balconies that are greater than 30 inches in height, so under 30 inches are exempt, and less than 12 feet above grade. So if they happen to be on a tall second or third story at 12 feet, wouldn't apply also. Material options are listed below, Again, you can see they are fairly similar to the previous, although there are 6 now, with a couple of, or one added performance criteria there, and also the ability for exterior fire retardant treated wood. There is an exception to the walking surface criteria, and that's for decks, porches, or balconies that are not greater than 200 square feet. And in those cases, the actual decking surface itself can be any type of material as long as it's 2-inch nominal. Finally, for walking surfaces, we have those conditions of acceptance. And you'll recall that there were 6 different items under the options for walking surfaces. And there are a bunch of different tests related to those that can meet that criteria. Under item 1, there's 2 separate tests listed. And then item 6 is covered by section R 327.3.5.2. So different options to get there for decking. But for the most part, unless it's a small deck, it's not going to be your typical lumber. I am aware that there are some synthetic decking materials out there that do meet some of these testing requirements. You just want to make sure they do before applying them. The final topic under material specific provisions is glazing, and that's section R 327.3.6. Under the glazing requirements, these apply to windows, of course, and also windows that are within exterior doors and also skylights. So the requirements are either tempered glass, multi-layered glazed panels, glass block, or a 20-minute rated assembly, which is a frame and rated glass. In most cases, the multi-layered glazed panel condition means that most just standard double pane windows would meet this requirement. So nothing extra special that you have to do for this one.
Congratulations! This completes the Wildfire Hazard Mitigation Code training. Thank you for watching this presentation. We hope it was informative and enjoyable, and we appreciate you making it all the way through. Providing useful information to all of you is important to our team. If you have questions or comments, please contact our training and outreach program.